your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us. An endowment fund is being set up at the University of Lethbridge by a family of a couple killed by a grizzly bear in Banff National Park. Doug Ingalls and Jenny Guzzi were both 62, died along with their dog in a bear attack during a fall backpacking trip. Ingalls worked as an adjunct professor at several Alberta universities, including Lethbridge. Both Ingalls and Guzzi worked at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in the city. The endowment will be used to offer 2 student awards in each of their names at the university each year. Our city's chief financial officer says the financial situation is not good for Lethbridge. Daryl Matthews painted the gloomy picture during recent Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee meetings. He says escalating economic challenges are being tied to inflation and interest rates are poised to significantly affect land development in our community. He says local developers are scaling back subdivisions and building activities, a trend expected to continue well into next year. In addition, he says the city's airport reserve will continue to see pressures due to the pullout of Air Canada and the ongoing negative impacts of the pandemic. In 2022, the airport reserve was increased by $3 million, but it's seen continual decline. Matthews also says inflationary pressures and customer concern will impact city revenues until at least 2026. The CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge says the message from our city's CFO is not really much of a shock.
I don't think it's a huge surprise to people. Everyone is experiencing inflation in their own households, right? You're paying more for your utilities, you're paying more to put fuel in your car, you're paying more at the grocery store. So it's no different for any organization, including the city of Lethbridge, which has to buy products and services and is paying more to do that. Likewise, you're probably noticing on your credit card or perhaps your mortgage, higher interest rates are starting to take a bite if you've had to renew. And just as the city has to renew its debts and refinance things, they're seeing higher payments. So those pressures are going to continue to take more out of the wallet for the city as well, just like the rest of us. The combined challenge is that the sources of revenue that the city has to pay for that inflationary impact is under pressure as well. So just as expenses are going up, there's the potential for revenues to go down, and that, of course, is not a great mixture.
Lewington adds that the 5.1% property tax increase over the current 4-year budget cycle may not be sufficient. He says council may have to look at potentially looking into a property tax increase or cutting back on various city services. These tough economic times are taking their toll on nearly everyone, including our city's most vulnerable. 4 Lethbridge charities appeared before the city's Economic and Finance Standing Policy Committee during day 3 of their economic review process to ask for help. Habitat for Humanity, Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, Interfaith Food Bank, and Lethbridge Food Bank each came with separate requests. The Standing Policy Committee voted unanimously to recommend that City Council approve $150,000 from the Municipal Reserve, which would be divided equally between the 4 groups. That would give each nonprofit a total of $37,500 per year. Members agreed that although the economic outlook is grim, it's important to think about those facing poverty.
I was responding to a psychiatrist yesterday online who actually said that in his work, poverty is one of the most harmful factors, if not the most important factor affecting people's mental health. If we can give more support to them and through them to the people of Lethbridge, I say let's do it.
When this budget came forward, we had no idea that we'd be in the times that we are. As much as we'd like to be able to do more, this will take it for the next couple of years, put it into budget, and hopefully at that time, the interest rates and inflation are a little more in line with what we have budgeted for. At least if there's some relief with this 37.5 for each organization, I would support that.
I would urge everyone in this room on both sides of the table to dig deep into their wallets and donate to these causes.
The Economic SPC also recommends the $150,000 amount be included in the city's 2027-30 operating budget. Lethbridge police have laid drug charges against 2 men. The first is 51-year-old Christopher Francis Quebec, who is charged with 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance for the purpose of trafficking and possession of the proceeds of crime. Also, 27-year-old William Douglas Ewan Potter faces various drug-related offenses, along with possession of stolen property. Quebec is scheduled to appear in court on January 11th and Ewan Potter on January 26th. It's been 4 years since a young man went missing, but this year, his family will not be holding a vigil for him. We will explain why after the break. For the first time in 4 years, no public vigil was held in honor of a 26-year-old Calgary man who disappeared from Lethbridge. Friday marked the heartbreaking anniversary of Marshall Awasa's disappearance. On November 17, 2019, Awasa was last seen leaving his mother's home in Lethbridge. He told her he had to go to his rented storage unit located on Lethbridge's north side to gather some computer equipment. He disappeared into the night and was never seen or heard from again. A week later, his truck was found torched in the backcountry near Pemberton, British Columbia. Over the past 4 years, his mystery case has become widely publicized, even appearing in specials on CBS, Paramount Plus, and Discovery Plus, not to mention countless newscasts and podcasts. Marshall's mother, Tammy Johnson, says it's shocking that this many years later, there are still no clues to solving his case.
It is just unbelievably disappointing and really unbelievable, just purely unbelievable that we still don't have any more answers than what we had 4 years ago. Like, it's just at a standstill. You know, we've got lots of people who are very interested in Marshall's case, and you know, it's hard to believe that nothing has come out of all the media and everything that we've put out there. So what happened? We still haven't got a clue.
Johnson says the family chose not to do a public vigil this year because of the emotional toll it takes to organize. But she did create a personalized video for her son, and it was posted on Facebook. A new political organization founded by members of the Alberta NDP says it's time to consider a rebrand if they want to win the next election. Alberta's Progressive Future says the provincial party's association with the federal NDP is a hindrance on support. Organizers of the group, which launched on Wednesday, commissioned a poll by Janet Brown Opinion Research. It shows 50% of the respondents think the federal party has an influence over the provincial NDP. However, Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley doesn't feel a rebrand is warranted. She told reporters that she's proud of the name NDP, adding she's comfortable with the relationship her party has with its federal counterparts. The Public Health Emergencies Government's Review Panel released its final report to the province, which includes over 90 recommendations for consideration. The group, led by Preston Manning, was tasked with reviewing the legislation and governments employed during the COVID-19 pandemic and to come up with recommendations to better prepare Alberta to handle future public emergencies. The recommendations fell into three main categories, which include strengthening the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, developing inventory of scientific advice and advisors that can be drawn upon in the event of a public emergency, and reject province-wide school closures as a policy option in responding to an emergency, except in the most exceptional of circumstances. However, Alberta's NDP opposition leader Rachel Notley was not impressed with the Manning report. She says what caught her attention the most about the study was Chapter 3, which she says supports conspiracy theorists.
Which really reads like an invitation to conspiracy theorists and to pseudo-scientific purveyors at the expense of evidence-based science and medicine. Under no circumstances should any public servant in this province, physician or otherwise, be compelled to give serious consideration, for instance, to the delivery of horse tranquilizer to people who are suffering from a serious disease or illness.
We will hear directly from Preston Manning about his report in an interview with David Leese coming up later in the show. Calgary police say they've responded to 5 shootings over 4 days, and while they say several have the hallmarks of organized crime and were targeted, they continue to put people at risk. In one of the latest shootings, police say they responded Monday afternoon to the parking lot of a shopping center where they found a man dead. Two additional victims were located at the scene and transported to hospital with serious life-threatening injuries. Investigators believe the culprits fled the scene before police arrived. And in an unrelated incident on November 9th, a known gang member and his 11-year-old son were both gunned down in their car outside a fast food restaurant. Edmonton police found Harpreet Singh Uppal and his 11-year-old son fatally wounded after being called to a shooting near 50th Street and Ellerslie Road around noon on November 9th. But both the boy and his dad were pronounced dead on the scene. Still to come, more on the final report that was released this week by a group tasked with analyzing the province's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Leaders on the Frontier host David Leese sits down with Preston Manning to discuss the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel's final reports and recommendations. Welcome back. As mentioned earlier in our broadcast, a final report was released this week by a group tasked with analyzing the province's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The report includes over 90 recommendations to the province. To talk more about this report is the leader of the task force, Preston Manning, who sat down with leaders on the Frontier host, David Leese. Take a look.
What were some of the highlights of the impacts from your perspective? I mean, in the report, I think it cites the economic impacts, for example. How did that impact Alberta?
Well, yes, there were major impacts, and throughout the report, we try to acknowledge that a lot of people suffered because of
Indeed.
this. There was the health impacts. 5,500 uh, Albertans died, either directly or indirectly as a result of COVID, and these are tragedies for these families. The doctors, the nurses, the health workers were under strain for months and months and months, partly because we didn't have the capacity to handle a surge in demand. The teachers were asked in 2 weeks to shift from in-school training to online at-home training, which is a huge deal. So there's a lot of suffering and dislocation, and we try to make the point that the whole point of these recommendations is to try to ensure that these people don't have to go through that kind of suffering again.
So, in many ways, you're really trying to work at a strategy of prevention. At least this is part of what I picked up from the many recommendations being made. So, in many ways, this is an incredible beginning to a whole larger or myriad set of issues that we'll have to continue to deal with over the next several years, won't we?
Oh, yes. So now we should make clear that our recommendations pertain only to a situation where the government has declared a province-wide
Mm.
public emergency. Like, we're not talking about local emergencies. A lot of the existing statutes, the Public Health Act, the Education Act, the Bill of Rights are perfectly fine in dealing with localized emergency
Mhm.
that's very short and temporary. These recommendations pertain to the, the fairly rare occasion of a province-wide public emergency. Hopefully, you don't get into these more than 2 or 3 times a
Mhm.
decade. But a province-wide emergency that affects everybody is a pretty big deal.
A number of your recommendations seem to make really kind of common sense recommendations on how to improve emergency management in Alberta. And one of the things that I found intriguing is that you very much emphasize the role of elected officials in an emergency and the approach that needs to be taken. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think you want to establish who's ultimately responsible for what's done or not done. And our view is that ultimately it's the elected officials. These are the only people that the public can
Mhm.
hold accountable in
Indeed.
any way, shape, or form in a democracy. So we make that clear in this section on leading the response, that at the end of the day, the political people should approve or disapprove the orders and regulations that their officials put forward and be held accountable for what's done. Whenever you strengthen rights, you should say what's the duty that goes along
Indeed.
with the
Yes.
right. That strengthen the right, but there's a duty to exercise it responsibly. And you could actually put sections into the statutes saying we're going to expand your rights, but there's a duty that accompanies this. And so that if it gets into court, the question is not just did you exercise your right, but did you exercise your duty to exercise it responsibly? And that's partly our answer to that legitimate concern that, well, if you just let people do whatever they want, some people will abuse it.
Well, I certainly did notice that series of recommendations, and I think it's admirable that you were, dare I say, trying to look at the larger issues around how to renew democracy, how to renew the rights and freedoms within the provincial context. Is that a fair comment, Preston?
Oh yeah, and again, I'm repeating myself in the context of a province-wide public emergency.
Yeah.
This is the overall, because it's those big emergencies that actually, force the government to consider, do we have to limit rights and freedoms because of the nature of this
Exactly.
emergency? And so there's an increased stress on the exercise of rights and freedoms, and we say you should recognize that and try to increase the protection at the same time.
Up next, the Bank of Canada may increase its current rate of 5%. We examine how these rising interest rates and the impact of carbon tax on food costs are hurting Canadians. New polls suggest that the Trudeau Liberals are plummeting in popularity. Many attribute the recent 11-point drop by the Liberals to their carbon tax. Hal Roberts sat down with Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas. She says the carbon tax is what's causing many more Canadians to rely on food banks. Have a look.
The food prices are going through the roof. The carbon tax impacting our farmers, our truckers, and we're seeing record numbers of Albertans and Canadians going to food banks.
Yeah, and that's overwhelming as well, just in terms of the concern that is caused there. Here in Lethbridge, our numbers have increased drastically at food banks. They've nearly doubled in the last few years. And I think what's alarming about that is it's folks who are working full time. It's folks who, traditionally would have a fairly stable income and the ability to meet their daily necessities, but unfortunately, due to economic struggle and just where we're at as a nation right now, due to Prime Minister Trudeau's decisions, unfortunately, many Canadians are just not able to do that right now, and so they're having to resort to using a food bank on a regular basis.
Rachel, the Bank of Canada says we may not see 1 or 2% for an overnight rate for quite a while. In fact, we may even see another increase from the current 5%. How is this higher interest rate really impacting Albertans?
Yeah. So again, like the carbon tax, certainly when interest rates go up, it has a huge impact on people's ability to afford the necessities of life. And so, when interest rates go up, it impacts, the expense of our mortgages, it impacts our rent costs, it impacts food costs, it impacts everything really, because, things within our economy are so much backed by loans. And when the loan interest rate goes up, then of course, those that are selling those goods that we're purchasing also have to increase the cost. And so that said, it is having a huge impact on those in Lethbridge. I'm speaking to people who bought a home, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago at a rate of 2 or 3%, and now they're, maybe looking to remortgage in the next year, and they don't know how they're going to do it. They're feeling the crisis of having to pay, 1.5 to 2 times more for their mortgage. And at the end of the day, their paycheck hasn't gone up. And so it's a huge detriment to them. In addition to that, you have folks who are paying rental costs and, with fewer and fewer, places to live that are available to folks, they're just kind of trapped. And their rental costs are, going up on them, but they don't have any other options. And so again, they're feeling at a place of detriment. I think it's important to note that really it didn't need to be this way. The reason we're at this place is because the government decided to spend an astronomical amount of money, and that's really what caused inflation to skyrocket. Which then, of course, when inflation skyrockets, the cost of everything goes up, and then the bank tries to respond by increasing interest rates in order to slow spending. at the end of the day, everybody gets hurt. And so I think that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing Canadians in crisis mode.
Rachel, before we let you go, what are your thoughts on the UCP looking into potentially pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan and creating our very own Alberta Pension Plan, which would apparently put more money into our seniors' pockets? Now, Premier Daniel Smith says more studying has to be done and a referendum will be held on the subject first. But what are your thoughts of pulling out of the CPP?
Well, I certainly appreciate that Ms. Smith is taking the time to listen to Albertans and, trying to do as many town halls as possible and get people to weigh in on this decision. At the end of the day, the reason why she's put in this position where this decision is even coming up is because the Prime Minister has actually divided our country. He's pitted one region against another, one sector against another, one way of life against another. And so as a result, Albertans are feeling incredibly misunderstood and ill-represented. Our energy sector has been under attack for an entire 8 years while Prime Minister Trudeau has been, in power. Further to that, our farmers have been scapegoated on multiple fronts and not given the support that they need. Further to that, just our Western way of thinking and our work ethic has not been appreciated for what it is. And so as a result, Canadians are hurting. Seniors are hurting. And so, we're in this place where there's this financial crisis that has hit so many homes in the province of Alberta. And where people are really wondering whether or not they have a voice in, Canada's Confederation, and what our future is to be. And so, unfortunately, it's due to Justin Trudeau's policies and his desire to pit region against region that we're in this position to begin with. So, I think it can be assured that under a Conservative government, we wouldn't actually be having this discussion because I think we'd be unified as a country from coast to coast, and people would be empowered to work within strong sectors of their choosing. And to bring home powerful paychecks. And so Canada would be in a much better place altogether.
Up next, the province unveils their plan to make southern Alberta safer. Welcome back. The Alberta government says it has a plan to help boost public safety in southern Alberta communities. Public Safety and Emergency Services Minister Mike Ellis says it begins with a new crime-fighting unit for our region.
I am pleased to announce a new team of 6 scan investigators from the Alberta Sheriffs will be based right here in Lethbridge. This is a new regional team that will cover an area roughly bounded by Vulcan to the north, Crow's Nest Pass to the west, and the U.S. border to the south, and the provincial boundary with Saskatchewan to the east. This team is dedicated to supporting the local communities, is a tool in the toolbox to help assist with law enforcement. Over the past few months, I have spoken about our province's focus on border patrol. We will not allow drug cartels and organized criminals to import illegal drugs and guns and human trafficking, which is occurring and coming across the border.
The Alberta government is looking into the feasibility of pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan and creating a made-in-Alberta version. But how realistic is this? To give us his thoughts, Hal Roberts welcomes the former MLA for Cypress Medicine Hat, Drew Barnes.
Drew, many seniors I've chatted with seem that they're quite concerned. They don't want the province touching their pensions. How do you think Premier Daniel Smith is helping to put some of those fears at ease?
It's about getting the correct information out. And that information includes the fact that let's not forget that Quebec has never, ever been a part of the Canada Pension Plan. It's clear that Albertans have contributed more than 50% of what's in the fund. And they say that today the average net expected return for a young person starting is like 2.3%. When inflation is 6 or 8%, that is not going to provide an adequate retirement. But I understand, seniors that have worked hard their whole lives, raised their family, built our cities, built Alberta, they want to ensure that the stability is there. And because Alberta's been the #1 provider, it's up to Premier Smith to absolutely clearly show that the stability is there. And we will be better off if we do it.
Now, a recent study commissioned by the province says our share of the CPP is around $343 billion, or around half. Now, I talked to friends in Ontario, Drew, who ask, how's that even possible that one province can contribute that much?
No, it absolutely is correct because of the fact that We have the youngest working force. We have the highest wages. We contribute the most. And we, between 3 and 5 billion, receive annually less than we put in. And of course, since 1965, when this started, that $3 to $5 billion has added up tremendously. No, it's clear that the lion's share of that fund has been raised because of Albertans' hard work and Albertans' benevolence for the rest of Canada. And how a lot of Albertans I talk to, of course, we love Canada and we want to help our neighbors across all of Canada. But what's clear is the economy in the Maritimes hasn't improved. Alberta and Saskatchewan are usually the only two have provinces. All this money that Alberta has poured into the Canadian Confederation has harmed Alberta and hasn't helped other Canadians.
Premier Daniel Smith says more studying really needs to be done to see if it's in Alberta's best interest to create a homemade pension plan along with hosting a referendum. Now, Drew, the province says an APP would not look anything like Quebec's pension plan. So in your opinion, how would it be different?
Well, be different in a lot of ways. First of all, the Canadian pension plan only invests about 8% of its assets into Alberta companies. And of course, Alberta, our population is around 14% of Canada. Our economy is 30% of Canada. We deserve more right there. So we're going to put in safeguards can be put in so all pension money can be protected and grow at a lot higher rate than the current Canada pension plan. That's what needs to be done.
Drew, many of our viewers want to know what you've been up to since you left provincial politics. So let me ask you, how have you been keeping busy in the Medicine Hat region?
I have formed a political action committee and a foundation. We've continued to stay involved in Alberta politics, and we've continued to write and put things out. And I'm watching very, very closely. I absolutely know that Alberta should be the free and most prosperous place anywhere. And I believe that Premier Smith and the UCP government has to take stronger action than they have so far to make that happen. And I'm watching for the opportunity to, be on the side of Alberta families, Alberta children, and Alberta being free and prosperous.
What exactly is a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, and how does it benefit you? That answer is up next.